Ask the Podcast Coach for September 17th, 2022.
Let's get ready to podcast.
There it is. It's that music that means, hi, it's Saturday. It's time for Ask the Podcast Coach, where you get your podcast questions answered live. I'm Dave Jackson from the School of Podcasting.com, where you can plan, launch, and grow your podcast. And right over there, the one and only Jim Coulson from TheAverageGuy.tv and Home Gadget Geeks. Jim, how's it going, buddy?
Greetings, Dave. Happy Saturday morning to you. Rainy Saturday morning here in Omaha, but it's dry inside here at Ask the Podcast Coach.
That's it. Yeah, we actually got some rain here as well, which is good because it's that, I don't know, I've come to the conclusion fall is my favorite season because it's just beautiful and
for sure.
Not too hot, not too cold.
Fires,
and
pumpkin spice latte, those kinds of things.
There you go. And speaking
and coffee.
That's right. And of course, that coffee is brought to you by Mark over at podcastbranding.co. If you need something to look good, now that can be your website, it can be your artwork, because remember, your podcast artwork is the first thing they see. So they see you before they hear you. Maybe you need a whole website and you're like, I don't know, I'm just a mess when it comes to podcast branding. Go over and see Mark at podcastbranding.co. He'll actually do an audit of sit down with you one-on-one, do an audit of your situation and kind of figure out what's the mood of your show, what kind of mood do you want to kind of portray to the world. And again, that's all about branding. And the beautiful thing is Mark is a podcaster, so he gets podcasters along with being an award-winning graphic artist. And so if you want to look good, it's super simple. There's only one place to go, and that is podcastbranding.co. He's done Ask the Podcast Coach. He's done the School of Podcasting. He's done Podcast Rodeo Show. So I'm not just saying this because Mark is paying me, because he is. I'm saying it because he's really, really good. Podcastbranding.co.
Always as good as the coffee, that Mark guy. He's always as good as the copy. Thanks to Dan Lefebvre out there at based on a true story podcast.com. And Dan, thanks for your sponsorship here. If you need a new podcast to listen to, if something interesting, if you ever wondered, hey, was this thing really actually based on a true story, or how close to the story are they on that thing? Check it out, based on a true story podcast.com. And Dan, thanks for your sponsorship. Thanks for your mug sponsorship. This thing has been solid. And I use it, Dave, I use it well beyond Saturday mornings. It's, one time I took it outside, put ice in it, lemonade, maybe an adult beverage with it as well. Drank all the liquid, but the ice wouldn't melt because it's so well insulated. You know how you're at a party, you're kind of counting on your ice to melt, so you have some extra water before you get, so you don't have to go back. It doesn't, and these kinds of mugs, that doesn't work. But anyway, Dan, thanks for your sponsorship.
Well, the one thing I thought I would this is kind of a visual thing, but I had somebody on Facebook, and this is great. They said, hey, if you guys wouldn't mind, would you mind listening to my show and giving me any feedback? So first of all, kudos for having the courage to say, hey, can I get some feedback? Because I really think a lot of people don't do that. And so when I haven't listened to her show yet, she sent me to this page. And it looks like this is tied with a business. So again, a great idea. But the link she sent me had me scroll down all the way down here. So what I'm looking at is, in this case, it looks like the name of the show is Money Matters. And they have all of their episodes just players. So it's player after player after player after player. And sometimes you think, hey, that's a good idea, except there's no information here to attract Google. And also think about this. What if I scroll down and I go, ooh, they have this cool thing about student financial aid. If I want to share this episode, I'm going to have to tell somebody, go to this page and scroll down to like number 14.
Well, there's a share button, bottom right-hand corner. That one there is the share. You can share it on Facebook, LinkedIn.
Just for giggles, though, is that sharing this player? We'll try this.
Yeah,
here.
Let's see what it shares.
It does. It's sharing that. Now, here's the fun thing. If I go to the link that they're sharing, but I would just think you're missing Google juice. Okay, so that sends them to the Buzz.
Possible.
Yeah, see, that's sending them to the Buzzsprout page because that's who they're using for a host. And so if the goal is to get them to your website, which is where this originally was, so that's the first thing they did right. They put it on their website. But when I see this, or another thing I see is where most media hosts have the ability to have a kind of I call it a jukebox player. It's where you have basically one big box with multiple episodes. So it kind of looks like that, but and what most people don't realize is, again, it's not super easy to share. You're not getting any Google juice. Like in that case, none of that is on your actual website because it's an iframe behind the scenes if we get our nerd on. And so that was just the first thing I saw. And I always tell people, your podcast, think of it a little bit like a blog post with a player on it. And then behind the scenes, of course, you got the RSS to syndicate it everywhere. So, but that was just my first impression was like, I wouldn't do that. It's not horrible. It's like you said, you can share it. There is an information button there. So if they want to, if I go back here and
we don't really know what Google's doing right now. I mean, they're trying to figure out how to block or not block, but they're trying to figure out how to demonetize isn't the word, de-emphasized all this Jasper stuff, all this automated text that we're creating. You know, everybody's gone out and writing books using AI and stuff.
Oh, dude, I just came back from Content Marketing World in Cleveland.
Yeah.
Everything there was AI. Everything there was AI. And this one thing it was an interesting idea. They said, throw all your old blog posts and stuff into this, and we will use that to create AI. AI will then write stuff based on previous stuff you wrote. So it kind of gets, I guess, some of your jargon. But there was just a ton of AI this and AI that. I still say I'm waiting for Frosted Flakes anytime. You know, Tony the Tiger is going to come on and go, they're great now with AI. You know, so it's just like, so it's a fun buzzword and everybody's using it.
Well, okay, but whether it's real or not real or AI or not AI, it doesn't matter as much as some of the rhetoric coming out of Google about the rankings of pages. And they're actively trying to, from what I've read, they're actively trying to figure out how do we differentiate real content from AI generated content. And then I'm in the Jasper group on Facebook, so I follow all that and all the complaints that they get about. And someone was like, "I'm trying to come," and they kind of promised this in their literature, like trying to completely write a book just using Jasper, you may fall on one side or the other on this content, AI driven kind of content. It's really just fancy web scraping, and then they pull it together and have it kind of make sense for you, right? They're just pulling this stuff from the internet and kind of rewriting it for you is all they're doing, which is maybe what a human does anyways, right? We go out and do research and read some other things and just rephrase it into our own terms. So I think it'll be interesting to see. And I think if you're SEO conscious, you should probably pay attention to what's coming out of Google about their recommendations or how they're feeling about this newly minted AI content. I wonder, Dave, how much new content has been created using that AI versus what was being used before. Is it causing the internet to fill up?
That's a good question.
Are we getting more content out there, kind of thing? So
I just know Gary says I've been using Jasper sparingly. I have not been using Jasper at all, which is dumb because I pay them whatever $99 a month.
That's $100 a month.
Yeah,
that's a lot. You better be creating some stuff for that kind of ROI, right?
Yeah. My problem is the stuff is in my head, and I just need to get it out of my head, and so I type it up, and I get done, and I'm like, oh, I guess I could have, Jasper come in here and add more stuff, but I've already got I don't know. Writing hasn't been an issue for me. Unless it's a newsletter, which we'll probably talk about a little later. But
it is fundamentally changing from a podcaster's perspective. It is changing the way we could do show notes. And even think like Otter. I can now. I think we talked about this a couple weeks ago. I can drop that transcript in, and then it's going to attempt to make an outline for me. Go ahead.
I think you have a Big Shot Smarty Pants account.
Because I do. I have the $10 a month paid account.
See, I'm paying whatever it is now. I upgraded for the year. I think it was $30 a month or something like that. And you went into the upper right-hand corner and said, yada, yada, yada. And I went in, I was like, oh, that's cool. And I think you said you could show, I heard somebody say in Otter, you can show how much, like, Dave talked 80% of the time. I'm like, well, that's not good. And I'm like, either I'm missing the wrong button or what, but,
well, it did say it was in beta. So I'm kind of wondering if because you go to you would go to takeaways in the upper right-hand corner.
All right, got that.
It's the little
diamond.
And when you click on the takeaways, the outline should pop out for you.
No, I have nothing when I click on the.
Here, do you want me to? Here, I'll share my screen.
Share your screen.
Because this is riveting for our audio.
It is.
Our audio folks. Okay, let's get here. So we'll send it back. So this is a transcript. I just uploaded this yesterday. This had been having network problems. Had to turn the VPN to get some things working, and then everything went down this morning, which is always fun. But here's the speakers, so you can see speaker 2 and Jim down here. And then if you click on this diamond takeaways, the outline flies out, and it gives me some. I interviewed this gal named Hannah's role at Gallup. Hannah's favorite part about the role of a coach. My thought is I'll just copy these and put it in paragraph form and then write a little bit about each one of these so I make sure I'm covering all the topics in the show notes. But as soon as I tried to do that for my podcast, I couldn't get the thing to upload. And finally, I think I'm having some network issues. But
I'll have to
don't see it, huh?
What
plan are you on?
That's what I have to check, because if we go to,
I'm on the Pro plan. Oh, I'm on the it's still $10 a month, $99.
Yeah, here's mine. Here's a transcript of Lunch with Dave, and when I click on this, I get a whole lot of nothing. Okay. Yeah, no. Huh. Go over to your settings there, click on you, and then go to upgrade plan. When you click on that upgrade plan, because I just bought a year of this stuff.
See what plan are you on?
I'm on the Pro plan.
You're on Pro, huh? When I do go there, it says beta. So maybe only certain people have it. Only
because you're special.
That's because they favor me.
That's it. I'll have to email them and go, hey, throw me in the beta plan, kids. You got some fun stuff over there.
I want these takeaways. All right, so full circle on that. Now everybody's seeing the inside of Otter and such. Takeaways on that. I mean, again, it can be helpful. I like this. Okay, so transcript summaries versus Jasper AI kind of stuff, and I like the content coming out of AI or coming out of Otter a little bit better, because it's your stuff. It's not Jasper generating things for you. So that may be, at least for me, that just seems to be a better option, and it's cheaper. It's $10 instead of $100.
Yeah,
a month.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, it's it'll be interesting to see. Here, DR has something here. Says a newish platform that says how great they are because we are a hybrid of AI and human. There you go. Oh. That's really the best. But I went to their site and saw their own notes, and that's always bad. I shared this on my last episode of the School of Podcasting, and I might have talked about it here, where if you are using WordPress, don't have the same post open in 2 posts. Did we talk about that? It doesn't.
Say that again.
It doesn't make any sense. I had WordPress. Normally I'm not a guy that has 80 billion tabs open, but I had the same blog post open in 2 tabs.
Yeah.
And I fixed all my typos and hit publish. And I saw the second tab when I was closing things down. And I was like, ooh, I don't want to touch that because I've already published all my changes. And when I woke up the next day, all the typos were still there. And I was like, how did that somehow done? Because that's one of those doesn't make sense. If I didn't hit publish, it shouldn't have published the typos. But
do you have autosave? Auto?
That might have been it.
Yeah. So you probably had that version of the browser in focus, and it auto saved it. And then when you did go to hit published, it pulled the last auto save version, which is the one you hadn't edited yet. So yeah. Friends, when you're editing, one browser window at a time.
Yeah, that's it.
Like, make sure you just have one, because it can cause, especially across browsers. If you have, say you're editing in Safari and you've got a Brave open on another one, and they're the same page. In this particular case, that can really cause issues with the autosave.
Yeah, that was not a fun way to wake up.
No. Now you should. Well, let's see. You should have been able to go back to the version before it, because it probably had saved the corrections to the version before it.
Yeah.
Were you able to check that at all?
I was so panicked that I just knew. I just went in and was like, that's this and this and that, and that's this, and fixed them, and off we went to the races.
Yeah.
So that was kind of fun. One thing I wanted to throw out is, and I need to listen to Josh's show. Josh Liston has a show, and it's right in front of me, and I can't find it. But he did an episode about how it's hard to find guests. Oh, that's going to drive me nuts. I will find it later. But Josh Liston's an awesome supporter, and he put out an episode about how it's hard to find a guest. And I was just kind of like, somebody said, hey, I've in a Facebook group, I've been podcasting for over a year, and I've never been a guest on another show. And kind of my thought on that was, have you reached out to any shows to say, hey, I see you talk about topic A. I also talk about topic A. I also have topic B. I can bring value to your audience by talking about this. It's not a build it and they will come kind of thing.
For the love of God, don't do the fakery. Like I've listened to your podcast and it's awesome. And this one 5 years ago, don't do that. Right. Just say, if you want to go do the homework and listen to it and see if you're a fit, do that and mention it. But I think we get so much fakery via email these days. I think most podcasters are skeptical of it. You're right, Dave. I think you just got to ask, hey, I podcast on this. I'd love to be a guest on your show if you're taking guests. That's how I got my very first podcasting gig with Dave McCabe over at Home Service Show. I was listening to his show and I just said, hey, I'd like to add to this. And he said, yeah, I'm not ready for you yet. I got rejected on the very first, very first go around. Then about, 4 months later, 5 months later, out of the blue came an email. Hey, I'm ready now. Are you open? Right. So it's not always instant.
Yeah.
But don't you think, right? I mean, Dave, you're probably in a spot you don't need to do that. You're probably getting enough asks that it happens.
Yeah.
But yeah, if you're not, right, just ask.
Yeah. I get a lot of just really bad. I had somebody this week that was pitching a real estate person to the School of Podcasting, and it's most of the time I just don't reply. If I get one the next day that's like, hey, in case you missed it, then I'm like, okay, now in some cases I will reply and say, no, thank you. In some cases I will just click the spam button because that's what that is when, it's like you didn't do any research. Josh's show is called Dead Set Podcasting. I put a link in the show notes. You'll see it. But he was saying how because I was saying, and for the record, Josh was not talking about me. He actually emailed me, said, hey, I heard you say how people should have shows in the can. And I find it hard to have shows in the can. I don't know why that is. I wish I did. But he was saying I wasn't, poking at you when I did this episode. But I guess that's the question is, because for me, I see, there's podcast singular, guests plural, podcastguest.com. There's Podmatch. There's a ton of these things that I'm kind of like, how can it be hard? And I guess the other thing, you think about it, Josh is in Australia and he might be battling, because I know when I was on his show, I got up, I think, early and he stayed up late to get on that. So that might be a big... Probably
the other way around, because you probably did it in the evening, which is early morning for them. Yeah.
Yeah, so that could be a big problem.
I find because I've been using those services to find guests, last week or a while back, and I've been trying some folks out and getting some things going in. And I find once I got 5 guests deep, I kind of ran out of guests on those services. Listen, if you're an entrepreneur podcast, or if you're a wellness or well-being or leadership, there's no end to those.
Right.
But in the tech genre and the gadget genre, that's not as a popular podcast right now. So finding those individuals is a lot harder. So I had a lot of success early on finding some guests. And then I think I've gone through most of that were available. If I want to have leadership guys on, I probably could do that. But So it can, Dave, I think it can be a little thin in some areas, if that makes sense. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And then, and DR says, and I think, and again, I haven't listened to Josh's episode yet. It says you also have to make sure they can put one word in front of the other. They need to be vetted. Yeah. That's, I had somebody pitch me and I was like, okay, this is close. It was a PR person on how to pitch. Like and I was like, well, yeah, we all that's a skill my audience needs to know how to do, is how to pitch themselves to other shows. And so she got through the, okay, you're not related at all kind of hurdle. And so the first thing I asked the person that pitched me, this person about pitching, which I'm like, shouldn't the person that knows how to pitch be pitching? That's how many pitches can a pitch if the woodchuck could pitch whatever kind of thing. And I said, can you send me a link to where they were previously interviewed? Because A, like DR said, I want to make sure they can talk about it. Number two, I want to make sure they're not using a Blue Yeti in another state. I want to make sure they sound good in that whole 9 yards. So
yeah, we do check on the Gallup side of things in most cases, not all, but I try to check as often as possible. And then I'll do a call for Home Gadget Geeks. I'll do a call ahead of time. Just if someone asks me like, hey, can I be on your show? Oh yeah, I'm gonna, or I'm asking them, let's just do a quick connect and you can kill two birds with one stone. See what their setup is, and then you can talk about the content. Here's a bit of advice, though. Don't do the show on the test call.
No,
right? Don't do that. I had a guy who he was helping me do an interview, and he had a guest on, and he's like, "Oh, she's ready. This is going to be great." And we have her on, and she just couldn't come up with anything. And we got done with the call, and I called him back and I'm like, what's going on there? Like, you told me she had great stuff. And he was like, she did. We talked about it in the pre-show or in the pre-call. I was like, oh, you gave it all away, my friend. She gave it all away in the pre-call. People are different. If they've said it once and they have to go back and say it again, it's sometimes, not always, but sometimes it's not as good the second time. They like, you know that, Dave. If you got to go back and redo an interview, give some space, right, in between them, because people feel weird doing that. Yeah,
the first time I ever met David Hooper in person, I was on his radio show talking about how musicians could use podcasting. So this is, 16 years ago. And he would ask me a question, and it was just a topic. And I'd be like, oh, yeah, I can talk about that. Because there's one guy, he'd be like, nope, save it for the show. He's like, what about this? Can we talk about this? I'm like, oh, absolutely. Because there's this thing. He's like, nope. Just want to know if you can talk about it. And so, because, I've, if you've ever had to do the call of shame because some software ate your interview and then you ask the same questions and they're like, it's just not it's ick. Yeah.
Well, this week Wednesday night, I was doing an interview, hit the countdown timer. Then I didn't, I think I mentioned this. Then it didn't, see, this is a perfect example. I'm not sure if I told you this story in the pre-show or did we talk about this when we opened the show. See, this is why you got to be careful about. Do you know? Was it a pre-show or did I say this in the show? Or I didn't. I clicked the go live, but didn't.
Oh, yeah, it was pre-show. Yes.
Okay, so I clicked the live button and then didn't click, or I clicked the countdown timer, but not the pre-show or the go live. So we went 7 minutes, and I looked up and it said go live. It's up in the corner up there. And your heart just drops, right? You're like, oh. So we had to do it over again. Second time, a little better on some things, not as good on the others. So, you just gotta, you don't want to have them give it away. Like they'll want to tell it to you. Say, no, hold it. Hold it. Well, we do that to each other in the pre-show. When we get, we connect 15 minutes ahead, and then I'll start talking. And you're like, save it.
It's good. Yep.
Good enough. Save it.
Gary says finding guests is always a challenge. Sometimes I reach out on LinkedIn. That's a great suggestion right there. And he says, one time I reached out on the webinar contact email and actually got the lady to come on, and she was awesome. It takes effort though. Yeah. It's, that's one of those things where if you think about it, Jim, you said it. It's, that's weird. I deleted we'll go to Gary's second comment. I starred his comments so it wouldn't get lost in the chat.
Yeah.
And when I unstarted it disappeared. I was like, wait, how do I get it off the screen now? He said, I once was basically interviewing a guest was the CEO of a nonprofit, and they couldn't find the office to do the interview. Yeah, that's again going back to Jim's point of, not a bad idea to do a test call, but if we because we talk about niching down, and if I'm now instead of doing a weight loss show, I'm doing a weight loss show for men who are over 50. Okay, that also means I've kind of narrowed down the number of people. Like I might have a great guest that's 35, and I'm like, sorry. You need to have more fat and more, age in your mix or something like that. So that might be another issue when you're, the cool thing is that you've niched down. So when people hear your show, they're like, that's for me. And that also then limits the number of people potentially, right, that could be on your show. But go ahead, Jim.
Let me say one more thing around this. Don't be afraid to have guests back. I think we think it's a one and done. I mean, I've got a couple rotating ones. Uncle Marv is one of them. That's here in chat from time to time. And I have them on about every 6 weeks or 6 to 8 weeks because they're good. Like there's no law that says you can only have them on once. If they're good, invite them back and then ask them in the interview. Like when you get to the end of the show and you're still recording, say, hey, and they were really good. Say, hey, if I asked you to come back, would you say yes? They're not going to say no on the show.
No, I've had a horrible time.
So, you can get a commitment from them right there.
Yeah. The other thing to keep in mind is I want to say it was Jeff. Lead to read. Jeff Brown said he chased a guy for years. And he says, so looking back, no wasn't a no. It was a not now. Yeah. And so that's where, you can have some sort of system to just, remind you. Also, keep in mind the best time to get a guest is when they have something to promote. So I tried multiple times to get Pat Flynn on my show, and I was, emailing him when he had stuff to promote, but he kept having like these really unimportant things like babies. I was like, what? Family, but he came out with, I forget what it was, some product. And I emailed him like, it was his player. I forget the name of his player. That's really cool. And I said, I have your target audience. Let's get you on the show. And coincidentally, because I really had his target audience, he made time. So that was kind of cool. So again, no, maybe not now. Or in some cases, they're working on the next book. So they don't have time to interview or whatever's going on. So it's tricky. So, and of course, if you can, do a solo show. I know sometimes we've talked about that. Yeah, Jim is cringing as we speak. It's not his cup of tea. But
I just don't know what to say for that long.
Yeah.
I need somebody. I need a person. I need to bounce it off. I need to say, don't you think? And then let you talk while my brain just doesn't work that fast. I need you talking to regenerate some thoughts in my head. I say it all. And then it's almost like a shallow well. You take all the water, you need some time for that water to kind of come back. So I always need a co-host, and it's more fun that way with co-host.
Yeah. And if you're watching live, it's askthepodcastcoach.com/live. But again, that because you're here, you can ask your questions there in the chat. If you want to jump in.
We on that other thing?
Yeah, we're on askthepodcastcoach.com/join if you want to jump into the video. And if you're one of the 21 people watching on the Wisdom app, feel free to, and I need to do this. This was when I started this morning. I'm like, oh yeah, I was going to go in and figure out how they raise their hand or asked to be on the stage. I'm not sure what the verbiage is there, but if you should
get a little phone holder for your desk.
I do.
It
sits right here
where you can see it.
Yeah. So I can see it and it charges it. Cause the last thing I want to do is sit there and look up and go, oh, we have a caller. Oh, my phone's dead. That would be bad. The other thing I thought we could talk about that is just one of those things that I have one. I collect email addresses. I have the world's easiest newsletter, and yet I don't publish it. Newsletters are just one of those things and here's why newsletters are cool. Typically, we want people to do something, whether that's, join Patreon, buy a book, join a course, tell a friend, whatever it is. And the cool thing about a newsletter is they're one click away, assuming, of course, that you got them to open it, which is a whole other, ball of wax. but they are one click away. And I am amazed at how bad I am at not publishing. Because here's my newsletter. It's like the first opening, and I have this as a template. So it's like what I've been up to. So like if I were to type this up, it'd be like, hey, I spent this week at Content Marketing World with Rob Walsh. It was a lot of fun. Did this and that, blah, blah, blah. Here's what I learned. Big takeaway. And then it's like, and here's what I've done with podcasts. So here's last week's Ask the Podcast Coach, School of Podcasting, any podcast I've done. And then there's this section. It's like, what caught my eye? And I was like, hey, I saw this cool little bright, shiny thing. I might be looking into this. Here's what I'm reading. And we're done. So it's literally like a paragraph and a half, if that, and a bunch of links. And people have said, wow, I really like your newsletter because it's made for skimming. It's not this giant, like, here's a giant blog post. And I am amazed that I somehow cannot write a paragraph and a half. And I'm like, So, Jim, you probably do a newsletter for Gallup, right? Of some sort?
We do. Yeah, we actually do a couple of them. And, we have a team that helps. And so if you're doing this on your own, you got to make sure, the content creation bit is, I think, hardest for most people. Now, the first one or two, pretty easy because you have a lot of stuff to say. And maybe the advice is don't give it all away on your first newsletter. LinkedIn has made this easier, right? LinkedIn has this automatic newsletter thing now. Have you seen that?
I've seen that because all of a sudden I got 5 things in my email that's like, do you want to? And I was like, I guess I need to go over and make a School of Podcasting newsletter on LinkedIn.
Well, if you're sending out a traditional newsletter, you could repurpose that on LinkedIn because it only goes on LinkedIn for those folks, right? So you could repurpose it there. It's a way to do it. I bet I get 5 invites for newsletters a day from people. I hang out with these certified and coaches around the world. And they all have newsletters, right? But couple words of advice on this one. Like I said, don't give it all away in the first newsletter. Like, don't write a gigantic. That's the tendency, people. Even in the first couple, I would also like when you think about a podcast. When we always say write out 10 episode titles. I would write out 10 newsletter titles. What's the key piece of content in the newsletter? Our newsletter has one kind of key piece of content, and then everything focuses kind of around that. And I would say if you don't have 5 or 10 things that come out right away, you probably don't. You have a newsletter that's sustainable. Dave, I don't know about you. I've started and stopped newsletters dozen. It's got to be at least 10 times. Have you struggled? Have you started and then it just comes and goes?
My original podcast was I had probably 1,500 people on a list for musicians. And I was just writing blog posts, but those would go out as a newsletter. And then somebody said, hey, you should turn this into a podcast. And I was like, what's a podcast? And so it was really, and here's the thing too. I saw this at Content Marketing World. It's a stat that Rob and I both love. Rob Walsh from Libsyn is for every 2,000 blogs, there is one podcast. So if you're like, we're across the street from Cleveland football, Browns, the Factory of Sadness, whatever we call the stadium. And if there were 73,000 people in there and you said we need all the podcasters to go to the 50-yard line, it'd be like 58 people or 70 people or something ridiculous like that. And I always scratch my head because I did run into one that's a writer and that's her thing. And I said, oh, well, you should turn this into a podcast. And she's like, And I'm like, you've done the hard work. You've created the content. You just have to read this into a microphone. And even Sounds Profitable does this. They're like, hey, here is the latest blog post from Sounds Profitable. And I was like, that's ingenious because you then, if you go, wow, it sounds like they're reading that. Yeah, they just told you. We're reading the blog post from Sounds Profitable. So they do it in a way that doesn't really sound like it's reading. But if it does, they're kind of like, hey, guess what? Here's a blog post. And I was like, that's kind of cool. It's a kind of get out of jail free card if you want to just read your blog post. And I always tell people, look, I can listen to your podcast in the car, but I cannot read your blog post. And but the thing that drives me nuts that I just need to, we've talked about this a few times. I need more margin in my life because I'm always saying I'll do that in a minute. And one of them, I have Convertkit set up to take my feed from the School of Podcasting, take my show notes and put it into a newsletter, and it sits there and waits for me to go, yep, go ahead, which I love because, again, the typo scenario we're talking about earlier, I was able to fix those in the newsletter, but it's tricky, and I just need to, here's why. I had somebody sign up for the School of Podcasting that used the coupon code newsletter. And I'm like, hello, do you need another reason why you should have a newsletter? So I knew right there that, okay, that works. I just need to do it. And I need to just figure out, what's the deal, Dave? Why aren't you hitting publish or whatever? And I think most of it's, I'm going to do it later.
Fear of, I know you always, the typo issue, the corrections always is got to go back and fix things. Is there a little bit of fear in, before you answer that, let me say this first. So when we do our newsletter, we do them one a month. I have an editor. I have a writer. I have a content team that we get together and everybody pitches ideas, and then we put this newsletter together. I know it's going to go out. It's not dependent on my editing skills. Right. Dave, for you, would it be different if you hired an editor one time a month or whatever, just to specifically for the newsletter? Right? Then does the angst go down if you do that?
Probably, because then I can blame somebody else if there's. But
don't hire me. That's for sure.
Well, there are people though. There was a guy, and we were talking about, I forget what it was, but somehow promotion, and he said, "Well, just do this and then hand it to your team." And we're like, "Yeah, most podcasters don't have a team," and that's because he was kind of like, "I don't understand why people don't do this. Just record it in video and hand it to your team." I'm like, yeah, many people are a team of one. So,
well, in this area of productivity, I think this is where you find, like, if you're asking yourself the question, where is this getting stopped? Like, I know I'm in sometimes it may be farther down the production stream than the very beginning. And in other words, like, you dread the editing process. Writing is easy. You dread editing. But you don't even write because it's going to have to go to edit, and so it's farther downstream, and then figure out a way to get that hired out, or add a Patreon level for it, and say, hey, I'm going to have an editing sponsor. Someone can be that, and we'll mention it at the bottom of the newsletter, right? Hey, this newsletter was edited by Boom, that was supported by.
Well, what kind of, again, makes me want to kick myself is the way this is set up. I could literally go in, and I want to do this and say, look, this is going out Wednesday at noon. And then just during the week, like, oh, here's something cool I found. Copy, paste into the newsletter, save. It's going out Wednesday at noon. And then if whatever I put in there goes out at Wednesday at noon, if I don't add anything to it, that first paragraph should have some sort of value in it. And that way it goes out regardless of, whatever goes on or I don't know. It's just one of those things. I just need to make it a priority because, like I said, somebody signed up and I was like, well, that works, And so DR is saying, wait, so if you have a branded podcast, should you have a newsletter? Or if you have a newsletter, should you have a podcast? Yes and yes. Newsletters out. Here's the thing I love about people talk about podcast advertising and email is dead. I hear that a lot. Email's dead. Millennials don't read emails and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, oh, yeah, they do. It outperforms everything, hands down, no questions. Like, you just the hardest part is getting people to open it. Then that means you have to deliver value. That's really the key, is you have to give something. Also, if you're trying to get people to sign up for your newsletter, why? Because I don't know. Jim, did you wake up today and go, you know what? It's Saturday the 17th. I hope I can find a newsletter to subscribe to today. There's just not that many out there. So you have to have a reason to join your newsletter. Besides, I was surprised. The one time I did a very slow, confident, clear, I said, hey, if you're on a treadmill right now, or if you're in the car and you hear me say it's in the show notes and you're like, oh yeah, I was going to go to that last week. I totally forgot about it. What if I sent the show notes to you? Just go to schoolofpodcasting.com/newsletter. I was surprised because I'll get, a couple a month. And this was like, I got a couple in one day. And I was like, I should do that more often. So that was a thing that they're like, yeah, I am a person on a treadmill, or I'm out in the middle of the woods, or I'm walking the dog. But they could remember schoolofpodcasting.com/newsletter. I was like,
Well, let's ask chat. why they subscribe to newsletters. Let's just do a little so we've got, 25 of you out there in Wisdom. We got they can't in Wisdom. They can't do Wisdom. You should come over to askthepodcast.
guestcoach.com/live. There we go.
Yeah. And join us over there. But chat room, why do you subscribe to newsletters? And I think it's going to come down to value, but
yeah,
and everybody has a little bit different value.
Tom Taylor down in Nashville said, I wrote a monthly newsletter for 41 years. Holy shnikes. He says, but it took about 10 years to enjoy writing them. And now he misses it. So there you go. Yeah, it's kind of tricky. I like writing. Writing is one of those things where once I started, it's great. I mean, when I was in 6th grade, I wrote a poem at my church and people found it funny. And I was like, oh, wait, I can make people laugh. And if you would have asked me in 6th grade, what do you want to be when you grow up? I would have said a writer. But somehow I ended up being a copier technician.
I'd rather get a root canal.
Yeah.
I would rather get a Daniel J. Lewis says, subscribe to a newsletter to get content offers I can't get elsewhere. And I think John Buchanan says it well. I usually get free things, right? We incentivize individuals to sign up for newsletters by giving them something, right? In the process.
That's it.
What else do you see?
Well, I'm laughing because Larry Roberts said, I love the School of Podcast. And we can talk about this later. Dave is now officially on TikTok. And I did a TikTok about how I was on a show. And I don't want to have Jim on the show and go, joining us today, one of my favorite people on the planet, Jim Collision, from the home gadget stuff, and this person said the School of Podcast. And I was like, I started the School of Podcasting. And I actually even kind of accented the hey, there's an ing there that you missed. And so that was the TikTok. Let's see what else people are talking about. What do they get newsletters for? Thank you, Larry, for checking that out. I actually subscribe to about 40 newsletters on podcasting. I get a huge amount of education from them. Do I read all of them? No. Who has that time? But that's why titles are so important. Yeah, that's why. There's a great example. James Cridlin. I think if we had a drinking game, James Cridlin would be on the board.
Mentioned every show.
Yeah.
Every show. That guy. I'm a little jealous.
But James kind of reads the titles and maybe a sentence of a story. Because again, what's a great way to get people engaged is to leave them wanting more. So he'll be like, Acast, they laid off, I think 70 people, and you kind of want to know why. And so you go, and it's all at podnews.net. Read the stories are there. And I was like, So that's it. But so going back to DR's question of should I have a newsletter? Yeah, because James uses it to, James uses it to promote his podcast. He uses his podcast, you guessed it, to promote the newsletter, and he runs ads in the newsletter. So it's like a small cottage industry there. Gator says, I'm usually not a newsletter guy. I'm multitasking while listening to the podcast. Yeah, that's me. I'm kind of I listen to podcasts, so I don't have to read newsletters. But there are a couple. I know She Podcast has a newsletter. There are a lot of new Sky Pillsbury, which to me still sounds, she's awesome, but that still sounds like a spy name or something like that. Mm-hmm. We need to call in Sky Pillsbury. And
a really good chef name,
Yeah.
Chef.
Andre mentions this. I love the one from David Hooper. David Hooper then does the same thing. He actually talks about the stories on his podcast and says, if you want to see this, newsletter.bigpodcast.com. And he does that very well because I know it's newsletter.bigpodcast.com because he repeats it over and over, newsletter.bigpodcast.com. And that's the sole purpose of his show. Why? Because people click on stuff in newsletters once you get them to...
there are readers. We're not them, obviously, but there are folks who love to get reading. I think John Buchanan needs to get a little counseling. He says, once I receive the free thing, then I wait a couple of months, then I unsubscribe. He is a monster.
No, that's what I do. There are times when I've, if it's a lead magnet, I will download it, get it, look at their lead magnet, and then based on the lead magnet, I will unsubscribe, because there are times when it's like, hey, we got this cool free stuff. It's the best thing since sliced bread. And you're like, yeah, Jim needs more coffee here. I get the lead magnet. I'm like, meh, wasn't really that cool. And I'm like, if the lead magnet wasn't that cool, the other thing that's driving me nuts is, and I don't know if there's a fix. I won't throw her name under the bus, but I was on somebody's newsletter. I actually bought a product of hers, and I'm here to tell you, I cannot get off her email list. I've unsubscribed no less than 3 times, and I'm tempted to reach out because I like this person to say, hey, you might want to double check some things here, because nothing against, like, I've got what I needed. I've given you my money and all that stuff, but I can't stop. You're still pimping stuff to me. Any chance I can get off that list? So, St. Clinton says, I don't subscribe to newsletters from podcasts that I listen to, as I usually forget to subscribe. Yep. As listening to a podcast while doing something else, and I don't think about it later. Also, on my website in WordPress, Convertkit has a plugin that will add a sign up for the newsletter at the bottom of every post, which is, again, kind of handy at times. So that's where I get the trickle of people coming in. Another tip that I do for newsletters is, you're like, lead magnet, that's something to make. These don't have to be like giant creations. I have one on, I still get people that sign up for the newsletter to learn how to take phone calls on a podcast. And I was like, wait, what? Like, that's so old technology, but that post is really popular. And on that post is like, hey, would you like a PDF of resources to take phone calls on a podcast? And works like a charm. And I was like, it's because to me, I'm like, hello, StreamYard, Zoom, all these other places. Like, why are we worried about the phone? But, go ahead.
I was going to say, if you're going to do a newsletter and you're going to, acquisition's expensive for those. I mean, you'll get some easy ones, but I mean, it's some work to get those emails in there. You might be giving something away. You might, whatever, contests used to be a big deal. Sign up for the, we'll do a giveaway kind of thing. Make sure, especially now, you're checking the bounce reports off of Aweber or whatever, MailChimp, whatever you're using. When you send your newsletter out each month, make sure you go back in and check the bounce reports of who's bouncing. And then you need to, this is a big part of my job at Gallup now. And I spend 10 or 15 hours a month just finding our customers whose email address has changed. And then I go to LinkedIn and say, hey, you're on our list and your email's bouncing. And I get most of them back. Like, oh, sorry. Yeah, I totally forgot to change it with you guys. So right now with the great resignation going on and everybody changing jobs so often, we are seeing a full third of our database change every single year. So you might want to just make sure, if you want to keep that list current, you're doing some things to track down. LinkedIn is a great way to do that, by the way, especially for folks in the United States. It's sketchy in other parts of the world, just not everybody feels as good about LinkedIn as we do here in the United States. But in the U.S., finding U.S. people on LinkedIn and just saying, hey, you were on my newsletter. I'm getting a bounce. Do you want to update that? I think don't you think that's appropriate, Dave? I mean, that's not too spammy. I'm in your face. I'm trying to don't you think that's appropriate?
Yeah, absolutely. I always turn on double opt-in. Like, they have to, they sign up for the newsletter, then they have to click a link in the email that I just sent them to prove that they're real. I was using SendFox for a while, which is an AppSumo product. That's actually their own thing. And I had a ton of people from Russia sign up with really janky emails. Why, I don't know, to be honest with you. But if you're on a system that charges you more based on how many users you have, you want people to double opt in so you're not paying for stuff like that. So keep that in mind. The other thing, before we run off to thank our awesome supporters. Oh, Gary has a point here. We're going to launch a newsletter, but we could not get our execs to commit to submitting articles. Yep, that's we talked about that post show. Every show I had, every job I had before I got into really teaching, I was the guy like, hey, let's make a newsletter. I mean, I worked at a fast food joint. I made a newsletter just because we had a night shift and a day shift, and it was a way for us to communicate with that. One newsletter thing, Randy Cantrell from the Yale Studio here in Dallas, Texas. I've always been a subscribed to his show. I'm listening more now. Why? Because I get an email from Randy that says, hey, there's a new episode out. It's already on my phone. Like, it's there, but it's, in some cases lost amongst the 8 million other episodes that have downloaded. I'm like, oh, let's see what's going on with
such a good idea
with Randy.
Well, that plays to DR's question, right? Because Randy went from nothing to weekly or whatever whenever he posts it, right?
Yeah.
Talking about frequency, DR says, can you speak to the frequency of newsletters and effectiveness on how often it goes out? Some send weekly, some do every other week. At Gallup, we do once a month. We find 12 a year is just fine for what we're trying to do. So, Dave, I'll let you weigh in on this, but I think like everything, one, how much can you write? Two, not just from how much, but do you have enough content to write it on a frequency that's more than they're expecting? So, like, do you have, if you're doing a weekly, right, you got to have 52 weeks of content. Do you have it? Or is 12 weeks of content more, or 12 months of content more like it? I don't know, Dave, your thoughts on frequency?
Yeah, that's a great one. I don't know of any one that I'm subscribed to that's more than weekly. Because that just a point is like, look, I just heard from you. Off with you. Good day, sir. So, but I think, again, it also boils down to value. Like, if you were giving me something if AppSumo had a newsletter and they emailed, which I'm sure they do, and they emailed me every time there was a new tool out, and I could say, only show me these kinds of stuff, I would be broke, basically. I'd be buying new tools that I don't need on a daily basis. So I think it kind of boils down to that. And then for me, like I said, the newsletter that I'm trying to get myself in the habit of doing isn't really a giant blog post. It's just, here's a little blurb, here's a link. So it's like, I'm using the James Cridlin approach, right? I'm teasing you with what's going on, and then here's a link if you want more. And for me, that's all I can do right now. I do occasionally write blog posts on Medium and things like that, and I could put those out as a newsletter, and it's kind of dumb that I'm not. But, Larry says Podfest newsletter is twice a week. That's the actual newsletter. And then there are, the thing I find,
it feels like it's every day.
Yeah, because there's the newsletter, and then there's the, hey, we have a sale going on. I do hear from Podfest a lot. And the problem with that is if it's the whole left jab, left hook kind of thing. If there are too many that are just an ad, then when I see the newsletter come through, I'm like, you know what? I love Podfest. I'm already going, so I won't open it because I'm thinking it's just 20% off if I sign up with the code Red Hat or something of that nature. By the way, I just made that up. Don't use that. But there is a thing. I'm trying to think if I've ever signed up for a daily newsletter, because much like a podcast, if it's daily, it's going to be short and sweet, and unless you're Stephen King, so it could be tricky.
Well, there's a little fatigue associated with the daily. I just signed up, had a guest on last week that sends out a daily deal, and you start kind of going, after a while, you're like, it loses its effectiveness.
Yeah. Craig says our newsletter is monthly. It's a collection of all episodes related to that month, plus a tease for future episodes, plus any news about my host and me. Perfect. And that's probably what I should do. And that might it'd be interesting to see then, like, let's say I put out a newsletter at the end of the month and I'm promoting episodes that were weeks ago to see how much, did I get a few more clicks because people missed it? That would be an interesting stat to look at. And I use Convertkit, and that's one of the things I love. I can make everything a trackable link if I want to. Not trackable, of course. I'm monitoring. I'm not tracking anyone. I'm monitoring your activity. So, and
then I think through this, like for me, like the energy I spend doing my own newsletter, like I do this as a job too. Like, should I be spending that mental energy for a newsletter for work as opposed to my own podcast when I don't enjoy it? And this is the thing. If it was a natural for me and I enjoyed it, I could probably do both and not have any issues. But I have barely enough energy for one of them, much less two. So for me, I've started and stopped a newsletter, and I go, look, I'm not good at it. I don't want to do it, and it shows. I kind of half-ass them when I do them. And so for me, it's just like, I think you have to kind of have to make that decision. And you said, I think this earlier, but I'll say it again. Do you have the energy, the mental energy to put it together? If you're doing it just to do it, it's going to show in the quality. And then people will be like, well, why am I getting this again?
Yeah. As we're talking about this, I'm trying to figure out why I don't. And I can't come up with a good answer right now, besides the fact that it's good intentions. Oh, I'll do that later, Yeah.
Yeah. Craig says the whole thing takes 20 minutes. And, it sounds like he's got it templated.
Yeah.
It's just an information like, hey, here's some things. It's not, for some, I mean, I used to read Paul Thurrott's newsletter before he started podcasting with Leo Laporte. And it was he talked about it. He's a writer. So it was really well done. He talked about his kids and he talked about tech and some things. Now that was a newsletter I waited for and read every single week because it was good. But an announcement, I'll be honest, Randy sends his, and I news from the Yellow Studio or whatever that is. And I kind of skim through to see is there anything different about it. And I don't spend a ton of time in it. Now, hopefully he's having some success with it or seeing some difference. Randy, if you're in the chat room, and often if he is, hopefully it's getting the success that you want. But the ones I read are the ones that are well written, not just a template.
Yeah. Different strokes for different folks. Yeah, I know.
It's not right or wrong. It's just preference.
Yeah. And I was trying to think about what newsletters I read. One I always read is Eric Newsom. Again, no real schedule. Eric posts when he has something to say. Eric's worked for NPR. He's the author of the book Make Noise. And I really always appreciate his insight. And I have begged him, would you please make this a podcast? And his answer is apparently no. I told him, I said, I will even edit it for you for free because I want to hear it. And for whatever reason, he's a writer guy, and it's like, nah, I'm just going to write. But I always read it. Why? I can't get that content any other way. Mm-hmm. So that's another thing. So I think that's part of it. I think a newsletter, if you want people to read it, like Craig said, it's the list of all of their episodes and then a little bit about them. So you're going to get your super fans that want to know more about Craig and his co-host than that. Can we address images on newsletters, yay or nay? I think they're more appealing. That's definitely true. I think, and I'm not up on this. I know, especially if you make newsletters too sparkly, and because I know it used to be you could opt in. Do you want HTML or do you want text? You get into a deliverability issue. Jim, thoughts on this?
Yeah, it's a design. One designer says do this, another designer says do that. You should have, it should be 500 words. No, it should be 1,000. You want it as small as possible. No, this is one of those areas, Dave, that I think is kind of beauty is in the eye of the beholder. So what do you want to create? Certainly there's some guidelines around, like you said, you don't want emails to be gigantic. I think you got to be careful with the way you title things because spam filters are, avoid words, like exciting.
Free. You don't want to put the word free in your title.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think that's a preference. And maybe what your, what your listeners say, what are they looking for? I mean, certainly a graphic or an image is eye-catching and can add value to what you're doing. Certainly, we know from a TikTok perspective or even Instagram, people enjoy those quick scroll through type things. But I'm not sure, you talked to 10 different designers, 10 different content creators, they're going to give you 10 different answers.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, I agree. I think when I was using SendFox, I'm not anymore, but they had a cool way to make a button and it just made it stand out because the rest of it was text. And I always break them into headings. Like don't give them one giant big block of text. Nobody's going to read that. And by that, I mean, nobody is going to read that. Yeah. But break it into sections with headlines that let people know because people don't read, they skim. And when they see a good headline or subheadline, it lets them know, oh, I should probably read this. So I know a lot of newsletters have templates and things like that make everything pretty. Try it one way, see if it works. Try it another way, see if it works better. That whole 9 yards. Go from there.
Well, this is where you check. Sometimes you get a note back from a email host provider that says it's been blocked due to spam.
Yeah, and
then like, oh, okay, whatever, and they won't tell you why. This is frustrating. They won't tell you why, but then you kind of know. All right, I need to start looking at what did I just send, and then bounce that up against. There's a lot on YouTube. There's a lot of learning out there around this whole idea of sending emails and titling and some of those kinds of things. The problem is it changes so frequently.
Oh yeah,
because they're trying to keep up with the spammers. Spammers start to do stuff. They adapt the algorithms, not the AI, the algorithms to adapt. And so us poor part-time or whatever folks trying to figure all this out get left in the dust.
I've never heard of this. Coach Dave says, I type or import the first draft into text metrics. Then I follow the instructions to get the highest SEO score.
Yeah.
Some simple massaging raises the score, and it does work. My site climbed in the rankings. So there are all sorts of tools. I know Yoast SEO has a tool for WordPress and things like that. DR says, my favorite newsletter is We Edit Podcast, which is weird because their newsletter is about everything about podcasting, not just editing. So yeah, that's it's hard to stick it up to one subject. So,
and it's hard in this particular area, like podcasting. It's hard to come up with one. I think everybody's like, okay, I need the perfect newsletter. Well, you know what? It doesn't exist. It's the one you create, and then you tune it to kind of what Coach Dave said. You tune it. I'm sure what Coach Dave does to tune it to the SEO score takes a little time. Do you have that time to monkey around with it? The first couple times you use this, it's going to take you even more time than it should. You might have to spend a couple hours figuring out the tool, right? Do you have that time to put into it? And is it bringing the value that you're hoping for? You never know until you do it. This is the maddening thing about it. You can have a great newsletter. If it's missing the target, it doesn't matter how great it is. It missed the target.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a little bit of a moving target.
And of course, one way you can send a newsletter is via, in my case, I'm using Patreon to say hello to my awesome supporters over at askthepodcastcoach.com/support, because you can send audio, video, or you can send text, which is basically just an email. So I've done that in the past. I know recently I sent out a thing about how there's a thing in Google Docs where you can click a button and have basically Google translate what you're saying real life, which is kind of fun. But if you'd like to be an awesome supporter, go over to askthepodcastcoach.com/support. And I'm going to mute myself as we find out, drum roll please, who the awesome supporter is going to be this week. Open awesome supporters.
Okay, Dave. And the awesome supporter is Shane at radiogdr.com.
Shane at radiogdr.com. If you're at askthepodcastcoach.com, you are looking at Podpage. And if you'd like to try Podpage, go to trypodpage.com. And if you just can't get enough Jim Cullison, and that's an impossible task right there, go over and check out Jim at theaverageguy.tv. Check out the show Home Gadget Geeks. And when you think podcasting, think School of Podcasting. And that's just Dave trying to put some sort of weird Vulcan mind meld on you. So, of course, the School of Podcasting, we have courses. And, hey, you'll probably hear an ad about it in about 10 minutes. So I won't do that again. Thanks to Mark, was one of the sponsor, was like, hey, Dave, what is going on with the ads? And the interesting thing, let me wrap this up. If you'd like to be an awesome supporter, and hey, if we get more awesome supporters, there'll be less ads in the show. Not that ads are bad, but go to askthepodcastcoach.com/support. But one of the things I did realize as I listened back to the show, ads interrupt the momentum. And I was purposely trying to wait until we switched from one topic to a next. He said clicking the marker button on the Roadcaster because we're switching topics. But I tried to put these really quick 15-second ads when we switch topics. And even with that, so there was one that I made the mistake and I put it in the middle. But the rest we switch topics and a little music comes on. I give you like, hey, did you know that the School of Podcasting has blah, blah, blah. Go to Ask the Podcast or schoolofpodcasting.com/ask.
These are your ads?
They're my ads.
Host read ads.
Host read a bunch of ads because I didn't want them to be boring. So in the future, you'll probably get like one or two. And then I can go in and swap them out so that you don't hear like, oh, here's Dave again saying the same thing that I've heard 4 times. So I want to swap them out so you don't hear the same thing over and over and over and over. Yeah. So we'll see. But it was just one of the things where I had some people say, why don't you promote the School of Podcasting more on Ask the Podcast Coach? Like you're giving a free podcast consulting. You're in many cases consulting your competition. Like you should get something for that. And I'm like, well, I do. I have a Patreon. And they're like, yeah. And I just heard where you lost a couple. And I'm like, that is true. And I was like, well, let me play with this. And maybe I should be promoting the School of Podcasting more. So
if I wanted to sign up for Patreon, which I already have, but if I wanted to sign up for Patreon, how would I do that?
AskThePodcastCoach.com/support. Because not only there, you can support us via Patreon. You can just send us a gift via PayPal. You can buy Dave's book. And if it was available, you could sponsor Jim's mug. So
it's not available. Dan has it locked up.
He has it locked
up tight.
Yeah. So
lead pipe, cold lead.
Yeah, because I think it used to be, it probably still is askthepodcastcoach.com/awesome, I think was the link. But that sent you to Patreon. And there were people like, look, I like the Patreon thing. I just wanted to give you $20 on PayPal. And I was like, oh. Yeah. So I made
all right, so I'm still confused. Where do I go to
askthepodcastcoach.com/support. We'll get you there. Speaking of complexity, if you haven't heard, She Podcast has been postponed. They moved it to June. It's still in Washington, D.C., but Jess went into why it moved, and it kind of sounds like maybe a potential lack of ticket sales, but they were talking about how you have to have a ton of cash to give the whole, you're betting that you can get enough people to the event to where, because you basically say, yes, I will take X amount of rooms, Mr. or Mrs. Hotel. And then there comes a time when they're like, okay, time to pay up. And if you haven't sold enough tickets, it gets kind of sticky. And I'm not sure exactly if that's what happened, but they did mention that they got a big giant bill and they went, hey, we're going to postpone. That's one of those things where you just think a podcast event is simple. You just, you sell some tickets, you get a space, and they're like, no, it's a whole lot more complex. So
listen, it's a huge risk to do those things. I think sometimes people are like, oh, they're just in it for the money, which they are, but they're just in it for the money and they're to money. Well, those things, like if they go wrong, you are out some big dollars.
Yeah.
Right? It's
spooky.
Yeah. Hey, real quick, Stargate Pioneer says I used to have my Echo Mini hooked into my mixer. When I upgraded to the Rodecaster Pro 2, I I decided not to do it because I wanted the speaker available all the time for alerts, like my basement water sensor. And the opposite is also true, that I was playing an Echo through my system for a while, and I can mute it and unmute it, but sometimes you'd forget to unmute it or to mute it, and it would, your package has arrived right in the middle of the show, So you have to be careful of those things too if you're going to have those devices. The alerts, when a package arrives or when there's thunderstorms, which we're having right now, and so there's all these alerts going on all the time. So that's the other drawback to tying, Dave, to your point, which was my point. Tying that into the system is a little more complicated than just plugging it in. You have to think about what's it going to do live during the show as well. Is it going to send alerts? Is it going to notify you of things?
Yeah, mine notifies me throughout my entire house. Like, Libsyn starts in 10 minutes, that kind of stuff. That we got one this morning when we're sitting here, and it's like, Ask the Podcast Coach starts in 10 minutes. So DR brought up something. This is some great audio. You ready for this, Jim? There's some stuff going on at Patreon that's really, really bad. Maybe, allegedly, possibly. But if it's true, they just laid off their entire security staff. Did you hear that? Their entire team, they just went, at Patreon. They're like, everybody that's in security, there's the door. and they're not really saying much, but there was a tweet that insinuated that there were pictures that are really inappropriate. And Patreon allegedly, you notice how I'm being very legal here, was insinuating that, hey, if the Patreon account is hosted by somebody that's 18, we're good. And it's not us, it's them if they're posting pictures that they shouldn't.
Gotcha.
And it's kind of like, ooh, that's icky. So just be careful. I don't know what to do, but I can see where people are like, well, if this, it's just going to get, there's no, they need to come out. Jack, whatever his name is from Patreon needs to either address that. And we need a reporter to do some investigating because the allegations are huge. And if they're
true, like Cridlin should do it.
Yeah, that's me. I was like, come on, Jim.
Come on, James. Let's get on this thing. Let's do some investigative reporting. Oh, well, yeah, this just Google Patreon news and we'll leave that. They've got their they got some homework to do. I wonder if the recession, aside from that issue, which we're going to just let go. Yeah. Aside from the issue, I wonder if Patreon, is we have this impending recession that people keep talking about that hasn't necessarily gotten here yet, or it has, I don't know. I wonder if people are pulling back or if it caused some people to review their Patreon like, oh, I don't need to be supporting all these people. And of course, they take a cut of that. So that cuts their revenue as well. And I know a lot of organizations are kind of pre-planning for a recession. And so they're being proactive with cuts to say, yeah, we're going to trim down just a little bit in case it does happen. And we'll do that now. So I wonder if certainly in this situation, there's more to it than that. Yeah. But boy, they'll have a firestorm to take care of here.
Yeah. Coach Dave asking about the woman in the tube stuff. Is any of that stuff going to claim my microphone or redirect my output? No, it's just another input. It's like adding a co-host. Yeah. That's always listening and occasionally butts in when it's really inappropriate. When you have the woman in the tube tied to your show, because just all of a sudden she'll announce,
your package has arrived.
Your package has arrived.
Someone is at the front door. We used to have HelloFresh, theaverageguy.tv/HelloFresh delivered to our front door on Saturdays. And it would always during the show, always, someone's at the front door. And so
Stargate Pioneer says Tom Merritt at, I should know what DTNS stands for. Is following the Patreon story closely because that's a guy that came from This Week in Tech. I should know that show. But also, Stefan mentions, hey, didn't Acast get rid of some people? Yeah, they laid off 70 people. So maybe that's why they were spamming people so hard. Things are getting a little tight over there. Yeah.
Well, I don't know if they're getting tight as much as I think some people are anticipating this recession. They're like, hey, it's going to get tight. Let's do this. Let's be preemptive. There we go. Let's do that now.
Yeah, here's a great question. We're talking about newsletters. What do you know what you're using at?
I use MailChimp.
Yeah, I've tried many. The one I really liked because it was affordable and they had a great feature set was MailerLite, except and they had just moved. Now it might be better now, but they had moved to like this new user interface. And again, I'm writing a paragraph with a link, if that, sentence and a link. And it was taking me 20 minutes because I had to wait for the screen to kind of refresh and stuff. And it just came to me that, look, I'm wasting a lot of time on this. This should take me 5 minutes and it's taking me a half hour, 40 minutes. And I went, I'm saving $10 maybe a month by not using something like ConvertKit. Which is kind of costly when you get a bigger list, but I don't have that big a list right now. And I was just like, this is dumb. My time's worth more than the $10 I'm gaining. So I dumped them and moved to ConvertKit. I've used them all. I've used MailChimp. I've used Aweber. I like that ConvertKit has a thing where I can tag people. So if I have a lead magnet, and the lead magnet is about podcast equipment, I can tag them as a podcast equipment. And then if I want to send out a thing, hey, the Zoom PodTrack P4 is on sale for $150. I can tag everybody who's interested in podcasting equipment. So that's why I like ConvertKit. They're all good. I mean, there's not really a I try to stay away from Ben's house of email. Some guy that just started off in his basement.
House of email horrors is kind of what it turns out to be. Yeah, I think any of those services now, that's a pretty mature space, right? We're down to a handful that are doing it really, really well. And so it's a pretty easy. MailChimp was easy to do. Aweber, I've used both of those, and those have been easy to use. I, too, would post those newsletters to my site. So I'd take the newsletter, turn it into a blog, and then post it in the newsletter section of the site in case anybody wanted to see it. It's not a secret. You can. Well, that's another one to your site as well. Maybe it is a secret. Yeah. Don't post it to your site.
Wow. DR is pulling off old. I believe this is an old Steve Martin's joke. Fred's Bank. Yeah. Again, if you have an option where it's like, would you like this newsletter posted to the internet? Sure. Because you got links in it, and I don't know how it's going to be. It's on some weird thing, but okay. So here we go. I've never heard of this. Larry chiming in with a 3-point shot. Check out Beehive, Beehiiv, because eyes were on sale. It's my personal favorite. Yeah, and DR says yes. Now you know how old I am. That's all right. Back when Steve Martin used to do stand-up.
I don't remember Fred's Bank.
Oh yeah,
I do remember Getting Small.
There was Getting Small. There was my favorite when you're like 13, 15. And one of his lines was simply, he just stopped and went, okay, hey, Grandpa bought a rubber. And I was like, me and my friends are dying. I'm like, he said rubber. Yeah, well, are we ready? Let me, we should probably do this. It's time for the bad pitch of the week.
Oh, this was segment here.
This was in Facebook. And a guy goes into I think this is Podcast Movement Facebook group. Who wants to do a video call for YouTube and podcast? That was it. That was the pitch. And of course, people then replied and said, topic?
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, you might want to throw in what you're trying to podcast about. One strategy a friend of mine did, he's doing a podcast about the Chicago Bulls. And he just Googled Chicago Bulls on YouTube. And there was a person who had a really popular channel. And he reached out to the guy and said, hey, I'm doing this audio podcast. Would you like to be a co-host? And I was like, because the guy was like, yeah, I've been thinking of getting into podcasting. And so here again, the podcast is going to promote the YouTube channel. The YouTube channel is going to promote the podcast. It's the best of both worlds. It's chocolate. It's peanut butter all together. Dogs and cats living together. It's old movie quote week.
You just mixed Caddyshack and Ghostbusters. You did his voice as the gardener.
That's
in
true.
Caddyshack, but you did the quote from Ghostbusters. Same guy.
This is the same guy.
Different voice.
Bill Murray, who doesn't have a manager.
That was meta.
Yeah.
That was meta.
Let me see if I have anything else here as we got 5 minutes. We'll save that one for next week.
I wish we could say the other quote because there's another right before that. There's another quote where he says, hey, here is saying this. And it's true. This man has no, and I won't add that in there, but can't say that because then we'd have to put explicit on that.
Well,
that's my favorite quote.
There we go. You know what? We're just going to wrap it up early because I'm looking at it and everything we have is like, you know what? That's good for next week. That's good for next week. So, Jim, what is coming up on Home Gadget Geeks?
Yeah, my good friend Gavin Campbell, who's one of those hosts that I get back on a fairly regular basis, a guy I found a year or so ago, and he's coming back on. We spent a lot of time talking about home automation. So if you're kind of in that space wondering, like, home automation for the average guy, Gavin comes on. He's above average, but I'm the average guy. And you'll hear me complain a lot on that show about how complicated things are. So I'll apologize in advance. It's available a little bit later today, homegadgetgeeks.com.
Is this kind of like the thing where you just say, woman in the tube, I'm out of milk, and it shows up at your back door, or what kind of automation?
Well, no, all the different, the lighting, the plugs, how it all comes together. We look at a new device that's out that has longer range than some of these. Sometimes the problem with home automation is that the plugs don't go far enough, so you don't get a signal or some of those kinds of things. So we spend a little time with gadget nerdery on that stuff.
Cool. On the School of Podcasting, we talked about it last week. I want to say it's Indie Podcasts Network. Nope, that's not it. But it's something like that. Sonny Galt will be on the School of Podcasting. and because she's the person behind it. And I was like, well, what is it? And we kind of did a who, what, why, when, and where, and that whole 9 yards. That is coming up along with other chocolatey goodness things on the School of Podcasting. We want to say thanks to Mark over at podcastbranding.co, Dan at basedonatruestorypodcast.com. Thanks to the awesome supporters and everyone out in the chat room. We have 25 people hanging on here to the very end. We do deeply appreciate that. If you haven't liked and all that other YouTube stuff, if you're watching there, definitely do that. We have 47 people on Wisdom right now. Holy cow. So yeah, hit the like button, and we will see you next week with another episode of Ask the Podcast Coach. Now's the time, mein Sprockets, wenn wir dance.